The International Chemical Weapons Watchdog, the OPCW, has published a statement clarifying comments from its own Director General, who claimed that up to 100 grams of nerve agent were used to poison Sergey and Yulia Skripal in March.
For research activities or protection, you would need, for instance, 5 to 10 grams or so. But even in Salisbury, it looks like they may have used more than that, without knowing the exact quantity. I'm told it may be 50, 100 grams or so, which goes beyond research activities for protection.
The OPCW would not be able to estimate or determine the amount of the nerve agent that was used in Salisbury on the 4th of March 2018. The quantity should probably be characterised in milligrams.
Well, let's go live now to London and to Anastasia Churkina, who has been following developments throughout the day. First, Nastia, hello to you. What do we know here? Bring us up to date with what's coming out.
Well, Yunan, it's quite curious. With this story that's now been unraveling since March 4th, we can see more backtracking, it seems, than real evidence when it comes to this poisoning scandal that created the biggest diplomatic row between Russia and the UK. For starters, yes, we do have this example of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons chief saying it looks like from 50 to 100 grams must have been used in Salisbury. This had prompted lots of questions about whether this could have been potentially enough to kill all of Salisbury. We've also seen questions about what that much of a nerve agent piled onto a door handle would look like, given we're talking about 100 grams of liquid or gel. This was something that was asked by the Russian embassy here in London in a tweet. In reaction to all of that, given this spread throughout the world in media headlines, the OPCW did in fact release a statement where they said we would not be able to estimate or determine the amount of the nerve agent used, in fact, and the quantity should probably be characterized in milligrams. And of course, if you remember, before this, we've seen other examples of similar kinds of backtracking. When the laboratory Porton Down came out with a major revelation, very much expected to raise lots of headlines throughout the world as well, given they were expected to make a big announcement about Russia's involvement. However, we saw them come out and say they can't identify the source. And this, of course, came after Boris Johnson here in the UK had said that they had given him assurances that Russia was behind this.
We have not verified the precise source.
You have not been able to establish at Porton Down that this was made in Russia.
As I said, it's our job to provide, the scientific evidence that identifies what the particular nerve agent is, but it's not our job to then say where that actually was manufactured.
So to be clear, you're not able at Porton Down to say where it is from?
We haven't yet been able to do that.
But when I look at the evidence, the people from Porton Down, they were absolutely categorical. I asked the guy myself, I said, "Are you sure?" And he said, "There's no doubt."
And of course, another latest development are the statements from the Czech president, who said that his country had produced and stored and later destroyed Novichok, which also came as certainly a major backtrack, given that previously Russia having said that the Czech Republic could be among the countries that might have been able to produce Novichok was described as a lie by Czech ministers.
Novichok was produced and tested in the Czech Republic. It was a small quantity, though. We know when and we know where it was done. It would be hypocritical to pretend that such a thing never happened.
The Russians crossed all boundaries when they said the Novichok agent could have come from the Czech Republic. That is a lie.
Well, of course, the biggest backtracking of them all, it seems, that accusations against Russia flew immediately. It was named as the culprit. However, we are still waiting for the official investigation results that are yet to come.
Anastasia Churkina, thank you very much. Well, let's bring in now Philip Ingram, former intelligence and security officer, for his take on the developments to this story. And there seeming to be, Philip, a lot of developments. A warm welcome to you. Let's just go first with what the UN Chemical Weapons Watchdog's Director General has said. We used the quote in the programme a little bit earlier, saying that 50 to 100 grams of liquid nerve agent were used in Salisbury. What do you draw from that? Do the injuries sustained tally with that quantity of lethal chemical?
Well, we're mixing a couple of things up here, and I think he corrected himself in the statement to say that it was milligrams. But it's very difficult to work out the exact quantity that's been used. The amount that was absorbed into the body of Sergey and Yulia Skripal is the amount that will have caused the damage. And there will have been another amount, a greater amount, will have had to have been spread over the areas that they were potentially going to touch, so that they got sufficient dose of the Novichok agent to give them the symptoms that they exhibited.
Yeah, let me just compare, because I'm just looking at varying chemicals of this sort, Philip. The lethal dose of the nerve agent VX, for instance, if absorbed through the skin, is 10 milligrams. VX is less toxic than Novichok. 100 grams of Novichok would have been at least 10,000 times more lethal of a dose. So, a lot of questions over that part. The same time, though, as you'll know, an OPCW spokesperson says the amount of the nerve agent used in Salisbury cannot be established and that it could be in milligrams. Why this discrepancy?
I think we've just got a misinterpretation of the scientific documentation that's coming out, and when the statement's been made, someone's made it incorrectly. They've tried to say something clearly when they haven't quite understood what's been read there. And the lethal dose that's required, as you said, for VX is I'd argue it's smaller than the 10 milligrams that you're talking about, and that comes an LD50 rate, where 50% of people who get exposed to that and that dose is absorbed into the body will die. We're talking of, with sarin gas, it's about the size of a grain of sugar that has to be absorbed. VX, it's about the size of a grain of salt. Novichok, and remember, Novichok isn't one agent. There are lots of agents that are in the group called Novichok. That is supposed to be much more powerful. But this is probably the first time that a live agent has actually come into the hands of laboratories and been used to its dangerous effect that we saw in Salisbury.
Just on what the Czech Republic president said about Novichok being produced last year in that country, Russia now says it's waiting for other nations to reveal whether or not they produce Novichok-type agents on their soil. Do you think other nations would come forward if they did?
I don't think the nations will readily come forward unless they're going to be exposed. But you use the right phrase there, Novichok-type agents. These agents, the laboratories all over the world will be manufacturing different chemicals that could fall into this type. If you've got the right laboratory, you've got the right facilities, people will look at them, especially when they're looking at them from a defensive perspective. If they look at them from a weaponizing perspective, that's clearly illegal against the OPCW and the Chemical Weapons Proliferation Treaty, and therefore can't be done. But there's two things to this. There's capability, and there's a lot of laboratories around the world that have the capability of producing this, but then to work out who's done it, there's intent. And you put capability and intent together, and that's why the fingers are pointing at Russia.
But you need an investigation to do that, of course. And Britain says, and said before the investigation, that only Russia could have made the Novichok nerve agent. Didn't mention intent until a little bit later. How much do you think the Czech president's admission, this is the leader of a sovereign nation, undermined that?
I don't think it undermines it in the slightest. The capability that's out there, again, there's a danger of people taking sound bites out of very complicated reports and taking those sound bites as the complete fact. It's not. And the statement that came out from the Chief Executive Officer of DSTL, Porton Down, where he turned around and said he could not, with the test that he'd done, positively point the finger at Russia. He then went on to say that, but that was not his job. His job was just to identify the chemicals that were being used, and he identified them as Novichok, and it was up to the wider intelligence agencies and the investigation to take that little piece of information, add in hundreds more pieces of information to put the complete picture together. And that picture points clearly at Russia.
Well, there's a lot of questions, I think, after today's development as well. We thank you very much for answering some of them. Philip Ingram, former intelligence and security officer.